Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. Ethan Carter squinted through the rain-speckled window of his small suburban home. It was well past midnight, and the storm outside was relentless. He leaned back into his chair, staring at the flickering light on his desk, a signal his makeshift lab equipment was malfunctioning again. Sighing, he pushed back and headed to the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee. As he turned on the kettle, a bright flash of light lit up the backyard, so sudden and brilliant it made him drop his mug. It shattered on the tile floor, but Ethan barely noticed as he peered out into the garden. At first, all he saw was steam rising from the drenched grass. Then, emerging through the fog like a specter, he saw her. The figure was humanoid but otherworldly. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim moonlight, like a pearl reflecting 1,000 unseen colors. Her hair, if that's what it was, rippled down her back in translucent strands that seemed to glow faintly. Her eyes, large and silver, looked directly at him. Ethan's breath hitched. He didn't believe in aliens, or at least, he hadn't until now. The woman stumbled, her movements unsteady, as though gravity was foreign to her. Her long, slender fingers grasped at the air before she collapsed into the wet grass. Ethan hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to lock the doors and call someone, anyone, but the scientist in him overruled the fear. Grabbing his raincoat, he ventured outside. "Hey! Are you, okay?" His voice faltered, feeling absurd addressing what might be an extraterrestrial. The woman didn't answer, but her head tilted slightly, acknowledging his presence. A faint, melodic hum emanated from her, almost like a song. Ethan's heart pounded as he crouched beside her. "Can you understand me?" he asked cautiously. She reached out a trembling hand, touching his arm. A tingling sensation coursed through him, and suddenly, fragmented images filled his mind, stars, galaxies, and something dark and menacing chasing her. Ethan gasped, jerking back. The images stopped, and she recoiled, looking distressed. "It's okay," he said softly, trying to calm her. "I won't hurt you." She tilted her head again, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. Another hum, more complex this time, resonated in the air. Ethan couldn't understand it, but it didn't feel hostile. Realizing she wouldn't survive long in the cold rain, he made a decision. "Come on. Let's get you inside." He wrapped his coat around her, careful not to touch her directly, and helped her to her feet. Her legs wobbled, but she leaned on him for support as they made their way back into the house. Inside, Ethan guided her to the couch and rushed to grab a blanket. She sat motionless, her glowing eyes scanning the room with an almost childlike curiosity. As he draped the blanket over her, he noticed small, faintly glowing lines running along her arms, like veins filled with light. She was stunningly alien, but there was an undeniable humanity in her demeanor. "Okay," Ethan muttered, pacing the room. "What now?" The woman watched him, her expression unreadable. She raised a hand and gestured to his desk, where his malfunctioning equipment still blinked weakly. "You know what that is?" Ethan asked, though he didn't expect an answer. She hummed again, the sound soft but layered, like a chord played on an ethereal instrument. The flickering light on the desk steadied, glowing a consistent blue. Ethan froze. "What the hell?" The woman pointed at the equipment and then at herself, as if to say, "It's me." Ethan's mind raced. Was she emitting some kind of energy that interfered with electronics? Or was she trying to communicate through them? I don't understand," he admitted, running a hand through his damp hair. She leaned forward slightly, touching her chest with one hand and pointing to him with the other. Then she reached out again, her palm glowing faintly. Ethan hesitated but eventually placed his hand over hers. The tingling sensation returned, stronger this time, and more images flooded his mind. He saw her surrounded by other beings like her, their glowing forms shimmering under the light of an unfamiliar star. Then came darkness, an overwhelming sense of fear and urgency. She was running, escaping something. The connection broke, leaving Ethan gasping for air. The woman slumped back, looking exhausted. "Someone, or something, is after you," Ethan whispered, piecing the fragments together. She nodded faintly, her expression weary. Just then, the lights in the house flickered, and a low hum filled the air. It wasn't coming from her this time. Ethan's heart sank. What now? He peered out the window and saw a faint, pulsating light in the distance, something hovering in the night sky. Ethan turned back to the woman. "Is that them?" Her wide eyes darted toward the window, and for the first time, fear was evident on her face. She reached out, gripping his arm tightly, and let out a series of frantic, dissonant tones. Ethan didn't understand her words, but the urgency was clear. Whatever was out there, it was looking for her, and it was getting closer. Ethan stood frozen, staring out the window at the ominous pulsating light in the distance. The woman's grip on his arm tightened, her silvery eyes wide with alarm. Whatever was out there, it wasn't here to negotiate. He turned to her, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can't stay here. They'll find you." Her melodic hum shifted to a sharp, discordant note, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. She gestured toward the house, her motions frantic but purposeful. "You want me to do something?" Ethan asked, glancing around. She nodded quickly, her glowing fingers pointing toward his lab equipment. Ethan's makeshift lab wasn't much, a few salvaged computers, a custom-built spectrometer, and other gadgets he'd tinkered with over the years. "You need my help too, what? Hide? Fight back?" She hummed again, this time softer but more complex, like a desperate plea. The flickering lights on his desk glowed brighter, responding to her presence. Ethan didn't fully understand, but he knew time was running out. "Okay," he muttered, rushing to his desk. "Let's see what we can do." The alien woman moved to stand beside him, her presence filling the small room with a strange warmth. Ethan's hands flew across the keyboard as he tried to patch together a plan. "First, let's figure out what we're dealing with." He pulled up his satellite tracking software, hoping to pinpoint the hovering light outside. The screen filled with static. "Of course," he muttered. "They're jamming signals." The woman reached out and touched the monitor. For a moment, the static cleared, replaced by an image of the pulsating light. It wasn't a single craft, it was a cluster of small, orb-like drones, scanning the area. Ethan's heart sank. "You're drawing them here," he said. "Your energy, your presence, they're tracking it." She lowered her head, guilt etched on her shimmering features. Ethan sighed. "It's not your fault. But if we're going to get through this, we need to mask your signal." The woman tilted her head, watching intently as Ethan rummaged through a pile of spare parts. "I built an energy dampener a while back," he explained, pulling out a device resembling a large wristwatch. "It's crude, but it might scramble whatever they're using to track you." He adjusted the settings, his hands trembling. When he turned to her, she was already holding out her wrist. "This might sting a little," he warned, strapping the device onto her arm. As soon as he activated it, a faint ripple of light pulsed through her body. Her glow dimmed slightly, and the hum in the air quieted. "Good," Ethan said, relief washing over him. "Now let's." The sound of shattering glass cut him off. He spun around to see one of the drones hovering inside the house, its sleek black surface reflecting the dim light. A thin beam of red light scanned the room, landing on the alien woman. "Move!" Ethan shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the back door. The two burst into the stormy night, the rain pelting them as they sprinted across the yard. Behind them, the drone emitted a high-pitched whine, followed by a burst of energy that obliterated the corner of the house. "Damn it!" Ethan cursed. The woman stumbled, her strength faltering. Ethan caught her before she fell, his mind racing. They needed cover, somewhere to regroup. "This way," he urged, dragging her toward the woods at the edge of the property. The trees offered some concealment, but the drone's red beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping the area like a predator searching for prey. Ethan pulled the woman behind a large oak, his heart pounding in his chest. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded weakly, her glow now almost imperceptible. Ethan peeked around the tree, spotting two more drones joining the first. They hovered silently, their lights scanning the ground methodically. "We need to outsmart them," he muttered. His eyes fell on the energy dampener strapped to her wrist. If he could amplify its effect, it might disrupt the drone's sensors. "I have an idea," he said, pulling a small multi-tool from his pocket. The woman watched as he dismantled the dampener, reconfiguring its components. He worked quickly, the rain making his hands slick and the circuit sparking under the damp conditions. "Almost, got it," he muttered. Finally, he pressed a button, and the device emitted a low-frequency pulse. The drones hesitated mid-air, their lights flickering. "Yes," Ethan hissed. The woman's eyes widened in alarm, and she let out a warning hum. Ethan turned to see one of the drones hurtling toward them, its red beam charging for another shot. Ethan grabbed the woman and dove to the ground as the energy burst scorched the tree behind them. "This isn't working," he shouted. The woman pushed herself up, her gaze fierce. She stepped forward, raising her glowing hands toward the drones. A resonant tone filled the air, growing louder and more intense. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked, scrambling to his feet. The tone reached a crescendo, and a shockwave of light erupted from her. The drones froze, their surfaces crackling with energy, before collapsing to the ground in a heap of smoldering metal. Ethan stared in awe. You destroyed them." She turned to him, her expression weary but resolute. Before Ethan could speak, a louder hum echoed through the forest. He looked up to see a massive craft descending, its silhouette menacing against the stormy sky. "Of course there's more," he muttered. The woman touched his shoulder, her hum softer now, almost apologetic. She gestured toward the deeper forest, urging him to move. Ethan shook his head. "I'm not leaving you." She paused, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, Ethan saw gratitude in her gaze. "Fine," he said. "But if we're going to survive this, we'll need a plan." As the craft's searchlights pierced through the treetops, Ethan and the alien woman disappeared into the shadows, determined to outwit their relentless pursuers. The storm masked their hurried footsteps as Ethan and the alien woman slipped deeper into the forest. Rain-soaked branches whipped against their faces, and the muddy ground threatened to pull them down with every step. Behind them, the ominous hum of the massive craft grew louder, its searchlights slicing through the treetops like accusing fingers. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to think of a plan. The woman's earlier display of power had stopped the drones, but whatever was in the craft above seemed far more formidable. He glanced at her. She moved with determination, though her glow had dimmed to almost nothing. She stumbled slightly, and Ethan caught her arm. "Hey, are you okay?" She nodded but didn't stop. Her silver eyes darted around, scanning their surroundings. Despite her weariness, there was an urgency in her movements, as if she were searching for something. "What are you looking for?" Ethan asked, though he didn't expect an answer. She gestured ahead, her hand moving in a deliberate arc. Then, she pointed at herself and hummed softly, the tone resonating with an almost magnetic quality. Ethan frowned, trying to piece it together. "You need to get somewhere," he guessed. "A safe place?" She nodded, then tapped her wrist where the dampener had been before he'd repurposed it. "Something to recharge you?" Another nod. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Great. I've got nothing left except duct tape and a half-fried spectrometer back at the house." She let out a low, mournful hum that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Hey," he said, gripping her shoulder gently. "We'll figure it out, okay? Just hang in there." Her gaze softened slightly, and she raised a hand, pointing ahead once more. Ethan followed her lead, the looming sounds of the craft spurring him forward. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled into a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees. In the center was a jagged rock formation, its surface covered in strange moss that glowed faintly in the darkness. The woman's eyes lit up with recognition. She stepped forward, her movements quick despite her obvious fatigue. She pressed her hand against the largest rock, and a soft hum emanated from it. The moss began to pulse with light, matching her frequency. Ethan stared, his jaw slack. "You've been here before." She didn't answer, but the way her hands moved over the rocks suggested familiarity. Ethan watched as she placed her palm on a smaller stone, and with a faint click, a hidden compartment slid open. Inside was a crystalline device, its facets shimmering with an inner light. The woman cradled it like a precious artifact, her expression both relieved and determined. "What is that?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. She hummed a soft response, then gestured toward the sky. "Something to stop them," he guessed. She nodded, holding the crystal aloft. It began to glow brighter, its light spilling across the clearing in waves of shifting colors. Ethan's awe was short-lived as the hum of the craft above grew deafening. A bright spotlight descended upon them, illuminating the clearing, making the woman's shimmering form stand out starkly against the darkness. "Time to go," Ethan shouted, grabbing her hand. But she didn't move. Instead, she knelt by the rock formation, placing the crystal into a socket that seemed custom-made for it. "What are you doing?" Ethan hissed, his panic rising. She looked at him, her expression calm yet firm, and raised her hand, motioning for him to wait. Above them, the craft lowered, its sleek, angular design cutting through the storm like a knife. Panels on its underside shifted, revealing a series of glowing apertures that hummed ominously. "They're going to fire!" Ethan yelled. The woman ignored him, her focus entirely on the crystal. She pressed her hand against it, and a sharp, resonant tone filled the air. The apertures on the craft paused, their glow flickering erratically. Ethan's eyes widened. "You're disrupting them." The craft responded by releasing a swarm of smaller drones, their metallic forms descending rapidly toward the clearing. Ethan grabbed a branch from the ground, a feeble weapon, but it was all he had. "This is a terrible idea," he muttered to himself. The woman stood, her hands glowing brightly now, and let out a powerful hum. The resonance amplified through the crystal, sending a shockwave of light into the sky. The drones froze mid-air, their surfaces crackling with energy before crashing to the ground in lifeless heaps. Ethan stared in disbelief. "You did it." But the celebration was short-lived. The craft above began to descend further, the air around it crackling with static. A deep, mechanical voice echoed from it, speaking in a language Ethan didn't recognize. The woman stiffened, her glow flickering. "Is it talking to you?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. She nodded, her expression grim. "What's it saying?" She hummed a soft, mournful note. Ethan didn't need a translation to understand. Surrender. "No way," Ethan said, shaking his head. "We're not giving up." The woman glanced at him, her eyes filled with an emotion Ethan couldn't quite place, gratitude, perhaps, or sorrow. She turned back to the crystal, her hands moving quickly over its surface. "What are you doing now?" Ethan asked, panic creeping into his voice. She hummed a complex melody, and the crystal's light intensified, its beams shooting into the sky like a beacon. Ethan realized too late what she intended. "You're calling for help, aren't you?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the craft as it began to charge its weapons again. A deafening roar filled the air, not from the alien craft but from above. Ethan looked up to see a second light streaking through the storm clouds, a smaller, sleeker ship descending at incredible speed. The new arrival emitted a series of rapid pulses, and the larger craft faltered, its lights dimming. The alien woman stepped forward, her hum harmonizing with the pulses from the smaller ship. Together, their combined frequencies sent a wave of energy that forced the massive craft to retreat, its engine sputtering as it disappeared into the storm. Ethan collapsed to his knees, his adrenaline spent. You called them off." The woman turned to him, her glow returning to its full brilliance. She reached out, touching his shoulder, and hummed a gentle, soothing tone. "Yeah, you're welcome," Ethan muttered, managing a weak smile. The smaller ship landed softly in the clearing, its sleek design unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The woman stepped toward it, pausing to look back at him one last time. "You're leaving," Ethan said, his voice heavy. She nodded, her expression a mixture of gratitude and regret. "Well, go save the galaxy or whatever it is you're doing," Ethan said, trying to sound nonchalant. She hesitated, then raised a hand, pressing it lightly against his forehead. A surge of warmth filled Ethan, accompanied by a series of fleeting images, stars, planets, and an overwhelming sense of peace. When he opened his eyes, she was gone, the ship vanishing into the stormy night. Ethan stood alone in the clearing, the rain falling softly now. He looked down at the crystalline structure still embedded in the rock, its glow fading but not extinguished. "Guess I've got a lot to think about," he muttered, turning back toward the forest. As he made his way home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The storm had passed by the time Ethan stumbled out of the forest, drenched, exhausted, and carrying more questions than answers. His home was barely recognizable, a smoldering ruin with shattered walls and scorched ground marking the drone attack. Smoke curled into the sky, illuminated by the faint glow of dawn. He stood in the yard, staring at the destruction. The alien woman was gone, her ship vanishing into the night, leaving him alone with fragments of technology he couldn't begin to comprehend and a sense of responsibility he hadn't asked for. Ethan's fingers tightened around the small crystal he'd taken from the clearing, a piece of the larger artifact she'd left behind. Its faint glow pulsed rhythmically in his palm, as though alive. "What now?" he muttered to himself. Inside what remained of his house, Ethan salvaged what he could. His laptop was miraculously intact, though most of his lab equipment had been obliterated. A few notebooks, a flashlight, and a handful of tools survived. He sat at the kitchen table, or what was left of it, and powered up the laptop. As it booted, he set the crystal on the table and stared at it. "What are you?" he whispered. The crystal pulsed faintly, responding as if it understood him. Ethan began typing, documenting everything he could remember, the woman's arrival, her abilities, the drones, the massive ship, and finally, the artifact in the clearing. He didn't know who he was writing it for, maybe himself, maybe someone else who might stumble upon his notes one day. Halfway through his account, the crystal emitted a soft hum. Ethan froze, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "Is that you?" he asked, feeling ridiculous for speaking to an object. The hum grew louder, and an image flickered across his laptop screen. Ethan's jaw dropped as the display filled with alien symbols and schematics. "You're a database," he realized, leaning closer. "Or, a transmitter." The symbols shifted, forming a rough approximation of a star map. One point glowed brighter than the rest. Ethan recognized it immediately. "That's Earth," he said, tracing the glowing point with his finger. Lines connected Earth to several other points on the map, forming a web of interconnected locations. At the center of it all was a massive, pulsing node. "Is this where you're from?" Ethan asked. The crystal pulsed once, as if affirming his question. He studied the map closely, trying to decipher its meaning. The web-like structure suggested a network, maybe a transportation system or a communication grid. But if that was true, the glowing central node had to be important, perhaps even a hub for the alien woman's people. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the doorframe. He jumped, nearly knocking the crystal off the table. A figure stepped through the ruins of his front door, their silhouette framed by the rising sun. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that seemed out of place in the aftermath of an alien encounter. His expression was calm, but his eyes scanned the room with a precision that put Ethan on edge. "Ethan Carter?" the man asked, his voice steady. Ethan swallowed hard. "Who's asking?" The man held up a badge. "Agent Mark Davies, Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs." "DA?" "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "It's real, Mr. Carter," Agent Davies replied, stepping into the room. "And so is the incident that took place here last night." Ethan stiffened. "What do you know about last night?" "Enough to know you had an unregistered extraterrestrial contact," Davies said, his tone measured. "We've been tracking the larger ship's movements for weeks, but it went dark shortly after entering the atmosphere. That's when we detected a high-frequency signal originating from your property." Ethan's mind raced. He hadn't even had time to process what had happened, let alone figure out how to explain it to a government agent. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, feigning ignorance. Davies raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Carter, we detected residual energy signatures consistent with advanced alien technology. We also know you've had some unconventional hobbies." He gestured toward the remains of Ethan's lab equipment. "I tinker," Ethan said defensively. "Doesn't make me an alien expert." Davies's gaze landed on the crystal, which pulsed faintly on the table. "And what's that?" Ethan's stomach dropped. He slid his hand over the crystal, shielding it from view. "A paperweight." Davies's expression didn't change. "We're not here to confiscate your paperweight, Mr. Carter. We're here to make sure Earth isn't in danger. That ship last night? It wasn't here to make friends." Ethan hesitated, weighing his options. He didn't trust the government, but he also didn't know how to handle the situation on his own. "Fine," he said finally. "But you're not taking this." He gestured to the crystal. "It's the only connection I have to what happened last night." Davies nodded. "Fair enough. But we'll need your cooperation. If you know anything about where that ship came from or why it was here, now's the time to share." Ethan glanced at the star map still displayed on his laptop. He pointed to the glowing central node. "They were running from something," he said. "She, the alien woman, she was trying to get here. I think she was calling for help, but she didn't have time to explain much." Davies leaned over the laptop, studying the map. "And this?" "I think it's a network," Ethan said. "A way to travel between worlds, or maybe communicate. She left it behind for a reason." Davies frowned. "If this is a network, it could lead them back here. We can't let that happen." Ethan shook his head. "It's not that simple. She was protecting this planet. I think she saw something worth saving." Davies studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll be in touch. Keep that crystal safe, and if anything changes, you call me." He handed Ethan a card and turned to leave. As the agent disappeared into the wreckage, Ethan sat back down, his mind spinning. He stared at the crystal, its faint glow a reminder of the extraordinary events that had upended his life. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: the universe was much bigger, and far more dangerous, than he'd ever imagined. The next few days blurred into a mix of sleepless nights and frantic research. Ethan kept the crystal close, its faint glow a source of both comfort and urgency. He pored over the alien star map on his laptop, trying to decipher its deeper meaning. The symbols, though alien, felt like they were on the cusp of revealing something profound, if only he could crack the code. Agent Davies hadn't returned, but Ethan suspected he wasn't far. Surveillance drones hovered at the edges of his property, their metallic hums a constant reminder that he was being watched. Despite the intrusion, Ethan's focus remained on the crystal. He was certain it held answers, but every time he thought he'd made progress, the alien schematics on his screen shifted, eluding his understanding. One evening, as a crimson sunset bled across the horizon, Ethan sat in the ruins of his kitchen, fiddling with the crystal. He held a small magnifying lens to its surface, studying the intricate patterns etched within. "Come on," he muttered. "What are you hiding?" He rotated the crystal, letting the fading sunlight refract through its facets. Suddenly, a beam of light shot out, striking the wall and projecting a series of glowing symbols. Ethan froze, the magnifying lens dropping from his hand. The symbols shimmered, rearranging themselves into what looked like a sequence of equations and star charts. "That's new," he whispered, grabbing his notebook and scrambling to copy them down. As he worked, the crystal began to hum softly, the sound resonating through the room. It was the same melodic tone the alien woman had used, but this time, it carried a subtle rhythm, a pattern. Ethan's pen stopped mid-stroke. "Wait a second," he said aloud. He grabbed his phone, opened a recording app, and captured the hum. Using a rudimentary audio analyzer, he converted the tones into waveforms and overlaid them with the symbols from the projection. "It's a language," he realized, his heart racing. Hours passed as Ethan worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the hums with the symbols and the star map. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, a distress call embedded within the crystal. The central node on the star map pulsed brightly whenever the hums reached a specific frequency. Ethan concluded that the node wasn't just a hub, it was a location. "You were trying to tell me where to go," he murmured, his fingers tracing the glowing map. "But why?" The answer came in the form of a low, ominous hum outside. Ethan's head snapped up, and his stomach dropped. The surveillance drones were gone, replaced by something far more threatening, a dark, angular craft hovering just above the treetops. "Not again," Ethan groaned, grabbing the crystal and shoving it into his pocket. The craft descended slowly, its searchlights sweeping across the yard. Ethan bolted for the remains of his workshop, slamming the door shut behind him. He crouched behind a pile of tools, his mind racing. The crystal's hum grew louder, as if responding to the presence of the craft. "Quiet," he hissed, as though it could hear him. The sound of mechanical whirring filled the air, followed by heavy footsteps. Ethan peeked through a crack in the wall and saw figures emerging from the craft. They weren't drones this time. The beings were humanoid, clad in sleek, segmented armor that shimmered in the fading light. Their movements were unnervingly fluid, and their helmets concealed their faces entirely. Each carried a weapon that pulsed with an eerie blue light. "Great. Foot soldiers," Ethan muttered. The figures spread out, scanning the area with handheld devices that emitted faint beeps. Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they found him. His eyes darted around the workshop, searching for anything he could use. His gaze landed on an old EMP generator he'd been tinkering with, a device meant to disable electronic equipment within a small radius. It wasn't finished, but it might be enough to buy him time. Ethan grabbed the generator and quickly wired the remaining components together. The crystal's hum grew even louder, almost urgent, as if it knew what was coming. I know," Ethan said, his hands shaking as he worked. The footsteps grew closer, and Ethan heard a guttural voice speak in the alien language. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable: "Search everywhere." With a final twist of a screwdriver, the EMP generator sparked to life. Ethan peeked through the crack again and saw one of the soldiers just outside the workshop. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, flipping the switch. A pulse of energy rippled outward, and the soldier's device fizzled and died. The soldier froze, looking at their weapon, which also flickered and dimmed. "Yeah, that's what I thought," Ethan said, a small grin forming. The soldier let out a sharp, guttural command, and the others converged on the workshop. "Or not," Ethan muttered, grabbing the crystal and bolting out the back door. Ethan sprinted through the forest, the crystal's glow illuminating his path. Behind him, the soldiers gave chase, their movements eerily silent despite their heavy armor. The hum from the crystal grew louder, almost deafening. Ethan clutched it tightly, willing it to stay quiet, but it seemed to have a mind of its own. Suddenly, a familiar sight appeared through the trees, the clearing with the rock formation. "You're leading me back here?" Ethan asked, his breath ragged. He stumbled into the clearing and placed the crystal back into the socket. The hum resonated through the stones, and the moss began to glow once more. The soldiers burst into the clearing, their weapons raised. Ethan threw up his hands, unsure of what else to do. But before they could fire, the rock formation emitted a blinding light. The soldiers hesitated, their helmets tilting as if in confusion. The light grew brighter, and Ethan felt a surge of energy ripple through the air. The crystal's hum reached a crescendo, and then, with a final pulse, the soldiers were thrown backward, their weapons and armor sparking violently. Ethan shielded his eyes, and when he opened them, the soldiers were gone, disintegrated or teleported, he wasn't sure. The crystal dimmed, its light fading to a faint glow. Ethan collapsed to the ground, his chest heaving. What the hell just happened? The crystal remained silent, its hum now barely audible. Ethan stared at it, a mixture of awe and frustration washing over him. You could have done that sooner, you know. As he sat in the clearing, the realization hit him, the crystal wasn't just a key or a map. It was a weapon, and a powerful one at that. But who had sent it here? And what were they fighting against? Ethan didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear, he was in way over his head. The clearing fell silent, save for the faint hum of the crystal resting in the socket. Ethan sat on the damp ground, trying to steady his breath. His pulse raced as the reality of the situation sunk in. He had just survived an encounter with advanced alien soldiers, thanks to a mysterious artifact that seemed to have a mind of its own. He looked up at the moss-covered stones, now dim and inert, as though they had spent the last of their energy repelling the attack. Whatever had just happened, it was clear the crystal wasn't merely a beacon or a map. "It's more than I thought," he muttered, running a hand through his rain-soaked hair. The question was no longer just about what the crystal was, but why it had come to Earth, and why the alien woman had risked everything to leave it with him. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp crackle. His heart jumped, thinking the soldiers had returned, but the sound came from the crystal. A faint holographic projection appeared above it, flickering like a weak signal. He leaned closer, captivated. The image resolved into a rough, translucent figure, a humanoid form, but clearly alien. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its elongated features gave it an ethereal presence. "Greetings," the figure said, its voice resonating in a strange, melodic tone. Ethan's eyes widened. The alien was speaking, but he understood it. Somehow, the crystal was translating. Hi. Ethan said, his voice shaky. The figure tilted its head, as if studying him. "You are the recipient of the Keeper's relic. This is a message for the protector of this world." "Protector?" Ethan asked, frowning. "I think you've got the wrong guy." The figure continued as though it hadn't heard him. "The relic holds the knowledge of our people, the Elfra. It is both a key and a defense. You must safeguard it, for the Harbinger will return." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Harbinger? You mean the people who attacked me?" The hologram flickered, and a series of star maps and schematics appeared around the figure, spinning in slow orbits. "The Harbingers are an ancient force that consumes and assimilates. They seek the relic to gain access to the Nexus, the heart of our civilization's network. If they succeed, all connected worlds will fall." Ethan's mind raced as he processed the information. The central node on the star map wasn't just a hub, it was a gateway, one that could link entire worlds. "Wait, why did you bring this thing here?" he demanded. "Earth can't handle an invasion like that." The figure's gaze seemed to bore into him. "The Keeper made a choice. Your world is young, but resilient. You were selected to protect the relic until the Nexus can be sealed." "Selected?" Ethan said, incredulous. "By who?" The projection wavered, and the figure's expression softened. By the keeper who entrusted it to you. Ethan's chest tightened as the memory of the alien woman's silver eyes flashed in his mind. She had chosen him, an ordinary scientist with a backyard lab, to guard something that could decide the fate of countless worlds. "This is insane," he muttered, standing up and pacing. The figure's voice grew more urgent. "The harbingers will not stop. They have found this world once and will return. You must prepare." "Prepare? How?" Ethan demanded. "I don't have an army, and I'm pretty sure duct tape isn't going to cut it against advanced alien tech." The hologram flickered again, its form becoming translucent. "The relic contains knowledge. Use it wisely. Trust in your resilience. You are not alone." Before Ethan could respond, the projection faded, and the crystal fell silent once more. For a moment, Ethan stood in a clearing, staring at the now dark crystal. The weight of the situation pressed down on him like a lead blanket. The world was in danger, and he was its unlikely guardian. "Not alone," he repeated to himself, bitterly. "Sure doesn't feel like it." He pocketed the crystal and began the long trek back to his ruined home. Back at the house, Ethan powered up his laptop again. He plugged in the notes he'd taken, cross-referencing them with everything the projection had revealed. The data felt overwhelming: star maps, schematics, and fragments of what appeared to be Eltheran technology. The crystal, now resting on his desk, pulsed faintly. Ethan placed his hand on it, half expecting another hologram to appear, but nothing happened. Instead, the crystal's light seemed to guide his attention to a specific star map on the screen. It was Earth's system, but with a twist. One of the outer planets, Saturn, was marked with a faint, glowing icon. "What's on Saturn?" Ethan wondered aloud. The crystal pulsed, and a series of schematics appeared on the screen. Ethan squinted at the images, realizing they depicted some sort of hidden facility embedded within one of Saturn's moons. An Eltheran base, he guessed. The crystal pulsed again, confirming his suspicion. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. The relic wasn't just a key, it was part of a larger system. If there was a base on Saturn, it might hold resources, answers, or even allies. But getting there was a problem. Ethan had no spacecraft, no crew, and no experience with interplanetary travel. "This just keeps getting better," he muttered. As Ethan mulled over his next steps, a familiar hum filled the room. His head snapped up, and his heart sank as he realized the sound wasn't coming from the crystal, it was coming from outside. He rushed to the window and saw another alien craft hovering above the treetops. This one was smaller than the first, but its design was sleeker and more menacing. "Great. More visitors," Ethan said, grabbing the crystal and shoving it into his pocket. The craft descended, its landing struts crushing the remnants of his garden. Ethan grabbed a wrench, an absurdly inadequate weapon, and prepared for the worst. The craft's hatch hissed open, and a figure stepped out. To Ethan's surprise, it wasn't an armored soldier. The being was humanoid, with shimmering, translucent skin that refracted the light like water. Its eyes glowed faintly, and it carried no visible weapons. Ethan tightened his grip on the wrench. "Who are you?" The alien raised a hand, palm outward, in what seemed like a gesture of peace. "I am Elithra," the being said, its voice calm and resonant. "A sentinel of the Elthra. I have come to aid the Keeper's chosen." Ethan blinked, his wrench lowering slightly. "You're here to help." Elithra nodded, stepping closer. "The Harbingers are relentless, but you are not without allies. The Nexus must be sealed, and the relic must be protected at all costs." Ethan glanced at the crystal in his pocket. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Elithra's expression hardened. "Deadly serious. Time is short, Ethan Carter. If we do not act, your world, and many others, will fall." Ethan took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "All right," he said. "What's the plan?" Elithra's glowing eyes met his, and a faint smile crossed its lips. "We begin by preparing for the journey to Saturn." Ethan nodded, the fear in his chest tempered by a flicker of resolve. "Let's do this," he said. Ethan's workshop had never seen so much action. With Elithra's guidance, it transformed from a makeshift laboratory into a command center of alien ingenuity and human resourcefulness. Every corner buzzed with activity as tools clanked, circuits hummed, and strange Elthran devices activated under Elithra's deft hands. The alien sentinel was a marvel. Its translucent body seemed to ripple with light as it worked, moving with a grace that made Ethan's clumsy adjustments feel like caveman mechanics. "Careful with that," Elithra said as Ethan struggled to attach a glowing module to a jury-rigged propulsion system. "Hey, I'm the one with opposable thumbs here," Ethan shot back, wiping sweat from his brow. Elithra tilted its head, the faintest trace of amusement flickering across its alien features. "And yet, I am faster." Ethan smirked despite himself. In the week since Elithra's arrival, they had developed a strange camaraderie, an alliance born of mutual necessity. Together, they had repurposed the remnants of his old experiments, combining human technology with Elthran knowledge to build something extraordinary, a small spacecraft capable of reaching Saturn. The ship stood in the clearing where Ethan had first encountered the crystal. Its sleek, angular design reflected Elithra's alien craftsmanship, while the patchwork panels and welded seams bore Ethan's unmistakable touch. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. "This is insane," Ethan muttered as he secured the last of the supplies. "I'm not an astronaut. I'm not even a pilot." "You will not be flying alone," Elithra assured him. Ethan glanced at the crystal, now securely embedded in the ship's control console. Its steady hum filled the cabin, resonating with an otherworldly energy. "This thing better know what it's doing," he said. Elithra placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. "The relic chose you for a reason, Ethan Carter. Trust in its guidance. And in yourself." Ethan sighed, his nerves still frayed. "Easy for you to say. You don't have to deal with gravity." Elithra's glowing eyes softened. "You are more capable than you realize. Now, let us begin." As the ship roared to life, Ethan gripped the control panel tightly. The launch sequence, guided by Elithra and the relic's integrated systems, was smoother than he expected. The ground fell away, and the ship soared into the sky, leaving the forest and the wreckage of his home behind. For a moment, Ethan was struck by the beauty of the earth below, its vast oceans, sprawling continents, and swirling clouds. It was a reminder of what was at stake. "Focus," Elithra said gently, as if sensing his thoughts. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening. The ship's AI, a hybrid of human and Elthran programming, handled most of the navigation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was his responsibility. The journey through Earth's atmosphere was turbulent, but once they broke free into the vast emptiness of space, a surreal calm settled over the cabin. "Okay," Ethan said, exhaling. "We're in space. That's new." Elithra's expression was unreadable, but its tone was approving. "You adapt quickly." Ethan snorted. "Not sure freaking out quietly counts as adapting." The trip to Saturn took several days, during which Ethan learned more about the relic and the Elthran technology. Elithra explained that the crystal's power was deeply connected to the Nexus, and its energy could interface with the base they sought. As they approached Saturn, the planet's rings came into view, a breathtaking display of ice and rock shimmering in the sunlight. "Beautiful," Ethan murmured, staring out the window. Elithra nodded. "Your world system holds many wonders. But beauty alone cannot save it." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Way to ruin the moment." The ship veered toward one of Saturn's moons, Enceladus. Its icy surface reflected the starlight, and Ethan could see plumes of water vapor erupting from cracks in the crust. "That's where we're going?" he asked. Elithra nodded. Beneath the ice lies an ancient Eltheran outpost. It was established long before your species emerged. No pressure or anything, Ethan muttered, adjusting the ship's controls. As they descended toward Enceladus, the ship's sensors picked up a faint signal emanating from the surface. That's it, Elithra said, pointing to a fissure in the ice. Ethan guided the ship carefully, landing near the fissure. The terrain was treacherous, but Elithra's knowledge of the outpost's design allowed them to locate an entrance quickly. Stay close, Elithra instructed as they disembarked. Ethan followed the sentinel into the icy chasm, the crystal in his pocket pulsing softly. The air grew colder, and the light dimmed as they descended deeper into the moon's crust. Finally, they reached a massive, circular door embedded in the ice. Elithra approached it and placed a hand on the surface. The relic's hum grew louder, and the door began to glow. Here we go, Ethan said, bracing himself. The door slid open, revealing a vast chamber filled with alien machinery. The walls pulsed with faint blue light, and the air hummed with dormant energy. This is it, Elithra said, stepping inside. Ethan followed, his gaze sweeping across the room. It was like stepping into another world, one that had been abandoned for centuries but still retained its power. What now? He asked. Elithra pointed to a central console. The relic must interface with the Nexus core. It will awaken the outpost and provide us with what we need to seal the Nexus. Ethan hesitated. And what happens if the Harbingers show up before we're done? Elithra's glowing eyes met his. Then we fight. Ethan swallowed hard and approached the console. He placed the crystal into a socket, and the entire chamber came to life. Lights flickered on, and the machinery emitted a low hum. The console displayed a series of symbols, which Elithra interpreted with ease. It is as I feared, the sentinel said gravely. The Harbingers are already aware of this location. They will come. Ethan clenched his fists. How long do we have? Elithra's expression darkened. Not long enough. The chamber shuddered, and alarms blared as the outpost's defenses activated. They're here, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elithra stepped forward, its body glowing with energy. Prepare yourself, Ethan Carter. This is only the beginning. Ethan grabbed a nearby tool, a makeshift weapon, and squared his shoulders. Let's give them hell, he said. The ground trembled beneath Ethan's feet as the outpost's alarms grew louder, echoing through the alien chamber. Blue lights pulsed along the walls, syncing with the hum of the Nexus core, which glowed brighter by the second. The crystal in its socket shimmered, projecting streams of data into the air like a cosmic aurora. Ethan tightened his grip on the alien tool-turned weapon, a staff-like rod emitting a faint charge at its tip. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. They're here, he muttered, his heart pounding in his chest. Elithra stood at the center of the chamber, its translucent body radiating an ethereal glow. The Harbingers will not stop until the Nexus is theirs, it said, its voice calm but resolute. We must hold them off long enough for the relic to complete its integration. How long are we talking? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with panic. Minutes, Elithra replied. Perhaps less. Before Ethan could respond, a deafening roar filled the chamber. The far wall exploded in a shower of ice and debris, revealing a group of Harbinger soldiers. Their sleek, insectoid armor reflected the flickering light, and their weapons crackled with alien energy. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but Elithra surged forward, meeting the soldiers head-on. Elithra moved like a living beam of light, weaving between the soldiers with blinding speed. It struck with precision, each blow landing with devastating force. The Harbingers fought back fiercely, their weapons firing bursts of energy that scorched the walls and floor. Ethan ducked behind a console, his makeshift weapon clutched tightly in his hands. He peeked out, watching Elithra dispatch 2 soldiers with an elegant sweep of its arm, but more poured in through the breach. This is bad, Ethan muttered, his breath hitching. The crystal pulsed again, and a holographic display appeared on the console in front of him. It showed the Nexus core's progress, 43% complete. Come on, he urged, willing the numbers to climb faster. The Harbingers advanced, their movements relentless and coordinated. One soldier spotted Ethan and aimed its weapon. He barely had time to react, diving to the side as a bolt of energy seared past him. Scrambling to his feet, Ethan swung the rod at the soldier. To his surprise, the weapon discharged a burst of energy, knocking the alien back. Ha! Ethan shouted, adrenaline surging. Take that! His victory was short-lived as two more soldiers turned their attention to him. Ethan fought desperately, using the staff to block and counter the soldiers' attacks. His movements were clumsy compared to Elithra's grace, but sheer determination kept him standing. Ethan! Elithra called, dispatching another soldier with a burst of light. The Nexus core must be protected. I'm a little busy here. Ethan shouted, dodging another attack. Elithra leaped across the chamber, landing between Ethan and his attackers. With a fluid motion, it unleashed a wave of energy that sent the soldiers sprawling. Go! Elithra commanded. I will hold them. Ethan hesitated, but the intensity in Elithra's glowing eyes left no room for argument. Don't die, he said, retreating toward the console. The Nexus core's progress climbed steadily, 58%, 64%, 71%, but so did the Harbinger's numbers. The chamber was a battlefield now, filled with the deafening sounds of energy blasts, clashing weapons, and Elithra's unyielding resolve. Ethan focused on the console, searching for anything that could accelerate the process. The crystal pulsed rhythmically, as if urging him to trust it. Come on, you beautiful rock, he muttered. Do your thing. The relic responded, projecting a new set of schematics. Ethan's eyes widened as he realized what it was showing him, the outpost's defense systems. Of course, he said, frantically tapping at the console. With a few quick adjustments, he activated a series of automated turrets embedded in the walls. They sprang to life, firing bursts of energy at the Harbingers. The tide of the battle shifted slightly as the turrets provided cover, but it wasn't enough. The soldiers adapted quickly, targeting the defenses with precision. Elithra fought valiantly, but Ethan could see it slowing down. Its movements, once effortless, now carried a hint of strain. Ethan! Elithra shouted, its voice cutting through the chaos. The Nexus core is nearly complete. You must prepare for the final sequence. Ethan nodded, his hands flying across the console. The core's progress reached 92%, then 96%. Just as hope began to rise, a new figure emerged from the breach. This Harbinger was different, larger, more imposing, with an aura of menace that made Ethan's blood run cold. Its armor was black and angular, and its weapon hummed with deadly energy. Elithra, Ethan said, his voice trembling. We've got a big problem. Elithra turned to face the newcomer, its glow intensifying. The Harbinger warlord, it said grimly. The warlord strode forward, its weapon raised. Elithra met its charge, the two clashing in a blinding display of light and energy. Ethan could only watch as the battle unfolded, each strike sending shockwaves through the chamber. Elithra fought with everything it had, but the warlord was relentless, its attacks precise and devastating. The Nexus core reached 100%, and the chamber's lights dimmed as the system prepared for activation. Ethan! Elithra shouted, its voice strained. Activate the sealing protocol. Ethan rushed to the console, following the relic's guidance. The core emitted a deep, resonant hum as it began to power up. The warlord seemed to sense the impending activation. It broke away from Elithra and charged toward the console. No, you don't. Ethan yelled, stepping into its path. The warlord swung its weapon, and Ethan barely managed to block with his staff. The force of the impact sent him sprawling, but he scrambled to his feet, refusing to back down. "You're not getting this," he shouted, swinging the staff wildly. The warlord knocked him aside effortlessly, but the distraction gave Elithra the opening it needed. With a final burst of energy, the sentinel struck the warlord with all its might, sending the towering figure crashing into the far wall. "Elithra!" Ethan called, rushing to its side. The sentinel was badly damaged, its light flickering weakly. "The protocol, finish it," Elithra said, its voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He returned to the console and initiated the final sequence. The Nexus core erupted with light, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The remaining harbingers were thrown back as the sealing process began. The crystal pulsed one last time, its energy merging with the Nexus core. A blinding flash filled the room, and then everything went silent. When the light faded, the chamber was still. The harbingers were gone, their forces eradicated by the Nexus's power. Ethan knelt beside Elithra, whose form was now dim and fragile. "You did it," Ethan said, his voice breaking. Elithra's glowing eyes met his. "We did it," it said softly. "The Nexus is sealed. Your world is safe, for now." Before Ethan could respond, Elithra's light faded completely, leaving behind only a faint, shimmering residue. Ethan sat in the silence, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. The battle was over, but the cost was high. As he picked up the crystal, now cold and inert, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "I'll make sure it stays safe. For you. For everyone." With that, Ethan stood, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.